Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co host.
For Wells.
We are back in action with a brand new NBA season. We have tons of content coming your way and so many games and storylines to cover in today's episode. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so opening night, opening week in the NBA, has pretty much been officially underway. Obviously, if you're watching this episode on Friday, right, we've gone through Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday games. Obviously, we'll still have some more over the course of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, as well as Monday. But so far, let's kind of discuss, some of these games and kind of talk about, some of these teams and kind of some of the first impressions and, where we're at. Obviously, kind of like preseason, you do want to take these first few games with a grain of salt because obviously, like for some of these teams, right, they've made some significant changes to their rosters, so they need time to kind of figure things out and gel. Whereas some of these teams that have kind of ran it back or haven't really made significant changes, they already kind of have some built-in advantages, under them. So that's something that you want to kind of keep in mind. So, for a lot of these teams, game one may be different than how they look game 20, right? Now, if we're in game 25, game 30, and, some of those issues are kind of still popping up, that's when you're probably more so concerned. But, we'll go into the first two opening night games, and you had the Celtics and the Knicks, right? The Celtics getting their rings, right? Ring ceremony always is, kind of an interesting thing, even if it's team that is not your favorite team, but regardless, it's always interesting to watch just to see the players and the fans' reactions, right? The Celtics hung up their 18th banner, right? Most banners in the NBA. And, they did not miss a beat on opening night, right? They pretty much routed the New York Knicks 132-109 in a game that was never really that close aside from like maybe the opening minutes, right? The Celtics basically they won this game kind of like how they won a lot of games last year by basically kind of obliterating you from three and then kind of being able to shut you down defensively as well. And you kind of saw over the course of the game. Now, regardless, if you get 29 threes hit on you, you're not winning anyways. But a lot of the threes that they were able to generate, some of them were just like ridiculous shots. Like Tatum had a number of, pull up threes off of screens that did look really good. But there were some tough shots. But then there were also some great open shots generated by the Celtics offense. And, again, they looked like they hadn't missed a beat. Of course, this is kind of what I was talking about, where the Celtics are a team that ran it back, didn't really make any real changes to their roster. But the Knicks, right, looked like a team that had kind of just been put together and are still kind of trying to figure stuff out. Obviously, they also don't have all their guys anyways. They have their starters, but they are missing some other guys like Mitchell Robinson. My Precious Achua, I think, also is going to be out for a while. But most of their main rotational guys are there, and it didn't look great, right? Offense, to be honest, wasn't a huge problem at times for the Knicks, although the Celtics defensively, again, made it tough for them on many of these possessions. The bigger issue was the defense. I mean, obviously, you had a couple of guys that did stink it up, like Mikal Bridges had 16 and shot 7 for 13, but in the serious part of the game, he was pretty awful. Like, they said that he changed the shot for whatever reason or something like that, and I don't really know why, because I never really felt that his shot was broken. I mean, his shot is kind of unorthodox, but the only thing that I can really kind of think of in terms of like maybe altering your shot if you already are a good shooter is maybe the quickness. But outside of that, I don't really see any other real reasons to adjust it. And it was a problem for him in the preseason as well, because I think he didn't really shoot well in the preseason either. He had like a 0 for 10. Yeah, exactly. But also OG Anunoby, 1 for 7, $200+ million man. Didn't really look like a $200+ million man out there. Hart was okay. Just didn't knock down any threes. I mean, like nobody really played amazing for the Knicks. I mean, McBride, I guess, did, but outside, and Brunson had 22. But then you kind of saw some of the issues with, like, say, Brunson sometimes getting attacked defensively. Even Karl Anthony Towns at times was getting, kind of picked on defense, right? Where it was kind of reminiscent of what we saw, say, like when the Celtics would play a team like Philly, right? Where like Jason Tatum or somebody would just kind of play in the, would kind of play in the pick and roll or go one-on-one so that way there's the center switched and they just can't really stay in front. Towns offensively was all right, right? 12 points, 7 rebounds, 5 of 9, only 2 threes attempted. But, again, it just looked kind of like a team that just, has just kind of been put together. So, not really worried about it necessarily. I mean, the Celtics were still my pick to win the title anyways, but I think the Knicks will be better than this. I just think, just first game against the best team in the NBA, essentially, that's always kind of rough. And, just in general, there are things that I think they can kind of maybe figure out over the course of the season, but it wasn't a great, debut. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. If we're talking about this game from the Knicks perspective, I think there's a lot to like, but there's probably more to hate so far. I think you really kind of saw it with the wings on both ends of the floor, kind of like you already talked about with Anunoby, pretty much being non-existent on both ends of the floor. If you ask me, Bridges, obviously that's another thing. I think that's probably the most concerning thing. If you're a Knick fan, because you traded for this guy, he comes to your team and he looks like a completely different player offensively. And there were times when even on defense, he didn't really look like the Mikal Bridges that, helped the Suns on that run. So that's kind of concerning, I guess, from that perspective. Another thing, you already talked about it with Robinson being out. There is no big man rotation on the squad. They are missing Hartenstein very badly. Jericho Sims is not the answer. And everybody knew that already, but I think bench play is going to hurt them for sure, because there were times when the Celtics kind of just bullied them off the floor, no matter who was.
Cameron Payne as your second unit mostly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Miles McBride showed some stuff out there. He was on a heater offensively, but it all goes back to defense, and that's what you were talking about. Like offensively, you kind of love what the Knicks were able to put together at times, because from the field they didn't shoot bad at all. They shot 55% from the field as a team, 36 from three, but you just look defensively, they couldn't stop anybody. But it is what it is. I mean, it's kind of hard to stop a guy when he's shooting 14 for 18. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, some of the Celtics shooting was just ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, they tied for the most threes in a game. Could have broken it, but then this third stringer guys came in and they missed 15 straight.
Yeah, isn't that a record too?
Something I think so. But,
yeah, they set 2 records somehow.
Yeah, but regardless, again, I don't think anybody, even if you don't expect the Celtics to win the title, I don't think anybody kind of really, well, maybe some people did, but I don't think you really expected the Celtics to really look that much different, right? I think, in some cases you kind of wonder, say, obviously he's not going to shoot 8 of 11 from 3 every game, but say, if his 3-point shot, goes up a little bit, and then say even like a Jaylen Brown, who also shot 5 of 9, and again, we don't expect him to shoot 60, 70% from 3. But if those guys can kind of join the party and kind of join, the other guys as near 40% 3-point shooters, that's going to make things even better. Like if Tatum's threes off of the screens or the step backs, if that stuff continues to improve, same with Jaylen Brown, that's going to make that team even tougher to stop. Because we know that both those guys can put pressure on the rim anyways with their size and length and athleticism. And we already know that they can shoot anyways. But if they can, if they, and that's my point where I've kind of talked about where those guys are still young. So those guys, in theory, can still improve. And we know, that they could possibly use the Olympic stuff easily as motivation. And that's kind of the stuff that I was talking about, where that's where I wasn't really quite as concerned about some of the off-the-court stuff and concerns that people have had, just because of the fact that, I think that those guys, take it seriously, that, Jaylen Brown clearly was not happy about being left off the Olympic team, but I don't think he would let that get in the way of the Celtics trying to win another title. I think he would be more likely to use that as motivation and fuel. And same for Jason Tatum, right? Because we've seen it. Both of those guys, are pretty, for all their talent, they're not very selfish guys. Obviously, they'll be willing to take a lot of shots, but even like a Jason Tatum, right? He's not a selfish player. So, that's where I'm not really concerned about the Celtics really at all. It's just a matter of, can these other teams play catch up and catch up to them in enough time? Because, again, there's a version of this Knicks team where if it improves and is better, can get there. But again, I don't expect this to happen every night. It's just, again, you do need your guys that you acquire to play better, on both ends of the floor. And that can't happen every night, because we know offensively they're going to be fine.
Yeah.
But defensively is the question, with the group, which in theory, again, Anunoby and McCall are pretty good defenders, as is Hart. You just kind of wonder about the Towns and Brunson piece, but like you pointed out, nobody was really good defensively for the
Yeah.
Knicks, even the guys that are primarily there for defense.
Yeah,
But
they got
yeah,
bullied off the floor. But I
right.
mean,
But
like,
does this game?
what's up?
Yeah, go on.
No, what's up?
Yeah, but does this game concern you at all about the Knicks, or is it kind of just like it's just one game? It's
Well,
not that big of a.
I mean, those who watched the last episode know that's my pick to win the NBA Finals. It was a head scratcher because I didn't expect it to be that bad. I picked, I think, Boston to win the game, if
Yeah,
I'm
we
not
did.
mistaken. I
We
think
did.
both of us did. So them losing wasn't a surprise. It was just more so the way that they lost. And the
Right.
Celtics, they just looked like. I mean, like you kind of already pointed out with the Team USA momentum carrying over, the team chemistry being there, the generation of efficient shots, I was mind blown. Like you said,
Yeah.
there were some contested shots where it's like, okay, since when did Tatum do hezzy pulls? You know what I mean? But then,
Yeah.
you wonder, why is a guy like Derek White wide open in the corner? That should be in the
Right.
scouting report. Like,
Yeah.
you cannot leave Derek White or Drew Holiday wide open on the 3-point line. And what did they
No.
do? Like, look at the starting lineup and look at the 3-point percentages. It's ridiculous.
Mhm.
Those
Yeah.
were a lot of wide open shots, and you already talked about it. So I think it's really,
Oh,
you have to give a testament to, what the Celtics are able to do offensively, and the coaching and the plays and the chemistry as well. And I think, you hit on it perfectly. Like, Jaylen Brown, yes, got 100% slighted from, the Team USA, and whatever other accolades you want to, say that he got slighted from. Okay, that's fine. But he's not going to take that out on Jason Tatum or his teammates, because that's not their
No.
fault at the end of the day. That's other people's fault who aren't even related to the Boston Celtics. So
Right.
to see them kind of rally around each other in a very meaningful way on a meaningful night for the team, I think is a huge statement win, and I think probably the most impactful win of opening week.
Yeah, and again, we've started a new streak where the team that on ring night that won the title has managed to win back to back.
Right. Good point.
Not back to back titles, right? But back to back opening night wins.
Good point. And they did all this
Yes.
without Porzingis too. So shout out to them
Yeah.
for that.
Exactly. That's the other factor.
Horford
as
hasn't
well.
fallen off yet.
No, yeah, and that's the other factor is that if he's healthy and comes back, we know that's going to be a tough matchup. So,
Yes, sir.
Now next up, the second game of the opening night was the one that I think we were a little bit more incorrect on, because we both thought the Celtics would win, but we didn't really expect a blowout. But we thought they
Sure.
would win.
Sure.
But this one, I think we both thought Minnesota would win. I think we both thought it would be competitive, but just that Minnesota, it might be a tough matchup. But by and large, from start to finish, the Lakers, played, pretty well against Minnesota. Obviously, there
Yes.
were moments in the game where things got kind of tight and kind of rough, but because the Lakers at one point built up like a 19-point lead in the second quarter. And then eventually the Wolves kind of came back and whittled it down. I think in the fourth quarter it got as close as 4, and then Anthony Davis, pretty much took the game over, and he was the biggest reason they won the game because of his superstar play, which we talked about. He has to have a huge season and he has to be healthy, for the Lakers to have a realistic shot of being able to win, a lot of these games, against these other really good teams as well, right? So, you look around at the box score. In terms of the starting five, it's the same as the starting five from late last year, right? D'Lo, Austin, Rui, LeBron, AD. LeBron didn't really have like a great game. He had some plays late, but by and large, he didn't really do a whole lot in the game. But to be honest, they didn't really need him for most of the game, because you had Rui Hachimura come in and he had 18 points, 5 rebounds, 2 steals, and a block, had 3 offensive rebounds, shot 50% from the field. Obviously, already mentioned AD. Austin Reeves, right, didn't shoot great, but he had a pretty good game, I think, as well, right? He had 12 points, 9 rebounds, 4 of which were offensive boards, including a few later in the game when the game was kind of starting to get really dicey for them. Also had 4 assists, a steal, and a block. 0 of 5 from 3, but again, rebounding and playmaking, that's good. Spent a decent chunk of the time guarding Edwards as well. D'Angelo Russell shot 4 for 12, 9 points, 5 assists, 2 steals. But to be fair to him, he did have some plays in the fourth quarter, but when it got to a 4-point game where he got it back up to 10, he got a layup and he got a couple of dimes to LeBron and a lob to Jackson Hayes. Max Christie off the bench didn't really do a whole lot, mainly because he was in foul trouble. Gabe Vincent didn't really score a lot, but had a couple of okay moments. Jackson Hayes coming off the bench, being active, catching lobs and whatnot. And then Dalton Connect also got minutes too, only 15, and in those 15 minutes, he got a three. He got a layup in transition as well as a couple of nice passes, kind of trying to make the case that he should be in the rotation. But obviously, the big story was also the fact that Bronny James checked in the second quarter, and it went pretty much as well as you could ask for, not in terms of his individual play, but just in terms of the team situation where they built up a big lead, they got him into the game. Yeah, the team spotted some points to Minnesota, but again, like it wasn't completely because of him. Like obviously the team was a little out of rhythm. Didn't score, did have a rebound, but either way, obviously that was kind of the big moment, right? They get to check in together, and they ran a couple of plays, I guess, for them together, right, or whatever, which is fine.
Yeah, knockdown.
But again, yeah, exactly. But it didn't really cost them at all. Like
No.
in the sense, like so it went about as well as you could have expected because you got him his minutes, you got the moment together. That was awesome, and it didn't cost them the game at all. And it wasn't also like a scenario where we're down 20 points. Let's put him in the fourth, and that's kind of embarrassing.
That would have been deflating.
Exactly. They shot 5 of 30 from 3, which is insanely horrible. But again, we talked about what Redick wants them to do. He does want them to get up more threes. And they did. Well, they didn't shoot a ton. I mean, they still only shot like 30. But I mean, they did crash the offensive glass. They had 15 offensive rebounds, which they were the worst offensive rebounding team in the league last season. And then also like with Redick's offense, we talked about it where, there is more consistent movement and motion. Because the thing like with Ham's offense last year, and funny enough, like Redick mentioned this in some of the Laker games that he commentated, was that part of the problem for the Lakers offense was that the consistency of the play calling was a real problem where like they would have stretches where they would run organized offense because we talked about it where there's stretches where they would run organized offense and then they would have long stretches where they just kind of stopped and that's when the offense would kind of fall apart because outside of LeBron you don't really have a lot of other guys that can kind of just act in like just freelance style, just do whatever they want. Like I guess you could make the case maybe occasionally D'Lo, but like you don't really have a lot of players that can really operate in that type of environment. Like most of these guys need structure in their roles on offense. And so that was kind of good to see. So, then from the Minnesota perspective, pretty ugly game from them for most of the game. They did come alive in the second half. And then in the fourth quarter, it kind of just turned into a little too much, I think, Ant-Man and hero ball. And even like Randall took 10 shots, but like, most of it wasn't always really in the flow of the offense. And you could just kind of see he had a plus minus of +2. So there were like, to be fair to Randall, there were some other guys on Minnesota that were significantly worse than him. Like Mike Conley, you almost forgot he was out there. Like he was minus 22 in 20 minutes, which is very horrible. McDaniels had 5 fouls, so he had a pretty bad game in my opinion. Gobert was okay, right? He had 13 and 14, also got a new contract extension, but he did get torched by Anthony Davis, so maybe not really okay. And then Edwards, plus minus of 0. I mean, shot a lot, but also took a lot of threes. I think a little too many. I mean, he made them, but you could kind of tell defensively, like they would rather him kind of drift around on the perimeter than get to the basket. And it's nice to have Anthony Davis out there defensively too. Also, like, I was kind of surprised that Dillingham didn't get his minutes. I mean, to be fair, I only saw a couple of Minnesota preseason games, so maybe they saw some things later on in the preseason that they didn't like. But, I was a little surprised that for the 8th pick of the draft, he didn't play. But then you kind of look at the guard rotation and where would his minutes come from, right? Because, like, you got 4 guards in the rotation, Conley, Edwards, DiVincenzo, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So whose minutes is he going to take away? Like Joe Ingles was just randomly out there for 7 minutes, okay? But, just in general, like I said, not too worried about them. But again, how I feel from the perspective of I think Minnesota will be a different team this year. Like, they'll still be good. But I just personally don't really love the fit of this group together. But I'm also not really concerned about the one game scenario. But what did you think from both of these teams?
Yeah, I kind of want to start with the Lakers. And I really want to start with their minutes and who started and all that stuff.
Yeah.
This should be the rotation that they constantly use. Maybe not, maybe probably outside of Bronny with the 3 minutes, but
Yeah.
in terms of all the guys who played tonight, that should be consistent. Hoping that you get
No
Vanderbilt
JHS.
back. Would you say?
No JHS.
Yeah, no, please no. I think we don't need to see that. I think Connect has proven in one game that he can be more of an impactful player than JHS at this point.
Yeah.
And I really liked what went on here because I think they generated a lot of good open looks,
Hmm.
more aggressive. The vibes are definitely higher with this team, and you can tell. But
Hmm.
I think the cool thing is you're using the weapons that you have available to you. Like you're using a guy like Rui Hachimura that can kind of fit in multiple positions where it's like, yeah, he can ISO in the mid range, but he can also take down, smaller defenders in the paint, and he can also
Hmm.
potentially stretch the floor. So I like, to see them drawing up plays for, your weapons. D'Lo, he had a lot of plays drawn up for him as well. Granted,
Yeah.
a lot of these guys didn't knock down the shot, and I think that's what it's
Right.
going to come down to for the Lakers is you're generating amazing looks, wide open looks, smart, efficient looks, but just got to knock them down. And I think that'll come with time potentially. Because you don't have a lot of personnel that you can really, reach deep into a bag for to kind of try and emulate the looks that you're getting. So this is kind of it. But yeah, a monster game from AD, like you said, dominated, proving the case on both ends of the floor. And it seems like, a lot of guys who are on Team USA, all this stuff is really carrying over into the regular season, which is pretty cool. So AD dominating, LeBron, still facilitating and being out there and kind of running point here and there. Yeah, I
Hmm.
think I liked a lot, from the Lakers, and definitely a surprise win. I thought Minnesota and Anthony Edwards really was going to come out and just make a statement, but
Yeah.
great statement from the Lakers,
And
especially
defensively
AD.
was the part and defensively was kind of the part that surprised me because that was
Yeah,
the part that I was concerned about more so than the offense, but the
sure.
defense, in a way, was really more so what won them the game. Obviously, AD ended up winning them the game,
Yeah,
but,
they
the
walled up.
offense, yeah, they didn't shoot that well. So, I mean, clearly the defensive part of the game was, the part that kind of got them the win, and they held Minnesota to just 103 of 41 from the field.
Yeah.
So, you know, um, again, each team is different, and I think, with Minnesota, there's not really a wing that you're really concerned about. Like, with Randall, he's a forward, but he's
Hmm.
more of a four, and you
Hmm.
do have LeBron and AD who can kind of physically match up with him. Obviously, outside of those guys, you also have Rui, but then
Yeah.
in the second unit, you don't really have anybody like that. Because even like a Jackson Hayes, he did get the lobs and whatnot, but then there were also moments where he was just kind of getting bullied,
Yeah. That's where you
by
miss
some of the.
Vando though.
Yeah, exactly. And again, he's still probably going to be out for a while. So,
Yeah.
and even like Christian Wood also is out. So, that's kind of something that you have to think about. But again, the goal for them is you just got to win as many games as you can, and then like hope and pray that something comes up. Because I still don't think that the team as currently constructed is good enough to be a contender.
No.
But again, I think both you and I kind of didn't really expect them to just be a horrible team. Like I think
Right.
both you and I think they should still be good. They should still be, like at worst, like a 40 something win team.
Yeah.
But, but probably not quite good enough to be a contender because you don't have enough in the back end of the roster. So ideally, you kind of want to turn some of the guys that aren't really playing into guys that actually can play. And then that way you don't have to
Facts.
rely on a guy like a Jackson Hayes quite as much, as you kind of have to right now because they can't really ask anyone else. I mean, who else? I mean, like they ran three guards at different points, like last year, but it's kind of out of necessity because again, you don't have, like you said, you don't have Vanderbilt, you don't have Wood, and I mean the only other guys that were, that didn't really play, Jalen Hood-Schifino, he's a guard and he's not even really that good. Then you have Maxwell Lewis, who's not a guard, he's a wing, but he's not really good either. And then you have Reddish, right, who is also kind of not that great, right? Like defensively he can be fine, but offensively that's where it's kind of a problem. And you just didn't really need him tonight. Like you
Sure.
got enough from the guys that you needed. So we'll keep in mind. And then from the Minnesota perspective, what did you think
Ooh.
of them?
This one was a tough one. Um,
Hmm.
I didn't like a lot of things offensively. I thought defensively they were
Hmm.
kind of like
Second half
middle,
was better.
yeah, middle of the road, but it's tough when Mike Conley's out there and then, you look at the the guard rotation there. And I mean, Alexander Walker is a great defender, but then, DiVincenzo kind of being out there, he's not like, an elite defender or anything like that. And then, you were talking about Rob Dillingham not playing. He's not a defender either. And it's like,
No.
where do you go, defensively for that guard spot, especially in the starting position? That's kind of what I would be concerned about going forward. But Ant-Man, I liked a lot of the things that he did, but too many hero ball possessions, like you said.
Yeah, and 3 assists, 4 turnovers. I think he's still got some work to do as like a playmaker. And he's gotten better at it.
Yeah.
But that's where, again, ideally you have another person who can do that. And that's why Conley still is important to the team.
Sure.
Because we saw it in the playoffs. Like, in that one game against the Nuggets that he didn't play, like Minnesota's offense looked really discombobulated. And then he comes back and then it looks, a lot more normal. But you can't keep relying on him every night because, he's a dinosaur at this point. But that's why you have a Rob Dillingham. It just seems like, which is kind of what I was leaning towards when we were talking about the offseason, where I was like, I thought he would play in the regular season, but, maybe he just doesn't, I mean, and it could just be a learning curve, right? Like maybe, but like, again, whose minutes are you really taking away is kind of really the question. Like, because there's lineups where they have DiVincenzo next to Edwards or Nickeil Alexander-Walker next to Edwards, right? Where it's like a 3-and-D guard next to Edwards as opposed to like a playmaking guard. Because since Edwards kind of has the ball in his hands, you don't really need like another primary ball handler. But, I don't know. That's where, some questions come in. But that's my point where I don't think they will win the title this year. Like, I think they'll still be good. But I don't think they're going to be quite good enough. I think it's just kind of a transitional year.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they're going to horribly drop off and just like be a bad team. I just, I don't think they'll be quite as good as last year. But I could be wrong. But either way, I'm not really that concerned about it because it's just one game. And, again, like the next game, they'll be playing the Sacramento Kings. They could come in and beat them by 30. Or they could lose by 30, and then we can panic again.
Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility. I just think bad start for them for sure. Like, even from Julius Randle's perspective, not a lot to like for me personally. If you look at the box score, sure, I guess you could say, like, he had an okay game. But if you really watch the game, like, it didn't seem like it fit. Like, there were just times when it's like, okay, we've tried everything else, give Julius Randle the ball. And then he would try and walk down, try and ISO. And then, he made some shots, but he also missed some. And it just didn't look like it was, he's really been put into the scheme per se, which I think he hasn't really from what I saw. And I think that's where you do kind of miss Towns, where, he was kind of able to just stretch the floor, give Ant-Man a lot of space. And, that was the thing. Like, the Lakers pretty much suffocated the Timberwolves entirely on the perimeter and, in the interior. So I think that's going to be a struggle for them.
Yeah, and I will say for Minnesota, to be fair, they had one preseason game, I think, where Randle played, where their group played. And that's like kind of what even the Knicks played more games, but I'm just saying, like, just in general, like, this is kind of a new team. So, they'll need some time, but we've both already kind of talked about why we just don't necessarily feel like the fit is ideal enough to be able to win the title. That's a lot different of a conversation than being able to win games, because I think they're still talented enough to win plenty of games, 50+.
Yeah, but it's top seed in the West for sure. It's just,
Yeah, I just don't think they're good enough to win the title.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to the next day, right? That was Wednesday, right? We had a decent crop of games. Not every game we really need to discuss, right? Some of the games is more so kind of like what we saw from some of the young guys, like say with Indiana and Detroit. We did see the Pistons and the Pacers play. The Pacers won over the Pistons. I mean, the Pistons had moments where they looked good in the first half. Where you kind of saw like, the added improvement of adding a number of 3-point shooters. Like Tim Hardaway Jr. started 4 of 7 from 3. Malik Beasley came in and had 14 points, 2 of 6 from 3. Ron Holland came off the bench, had a couple of solid moments, just couldn't shoot threes, which we kind of already knew. But there's other things to like about his game in terms of his activity on both ends of the floor, right? Constantly running, constantly in motion and movement. But, again, and Cade Cunningham was okay, right? First half, not very good. Second half, much better. And then, Jaden Ivey was fine. And then obviously, Duren was all right. But again, like the second half, they just fell apart, right? And the Pacers are also just better. So that's also part of it. I mean, it's kind of wild that, again, Halliburton shot 6 for 18 and they still, won. But
Yeah.
that's because the Pacers are a very deep team, as we've been talked about, right? Like Miles Turner at 20-9, Siakam at 19-8. Even off the bench, right? You got TJ McConnell with 14, Benedict Mathurin, right, who came back from injury at 19, right, in
Big
his
piece.
return. So exactly, and that's what we talked about with the Pacers, where they're so deep that in the regular season, anybody on that team on any given night could give you double figures in scoring, like
Yes.
15 or more. And that's kind of the nice thing to have. Unfortunately, you did have an injury situation where James Wiseman came in and actually had scored like I think 6 straight points,
Yeah.
but then unfortunately had to leave because of a non-contact injury. And then, as it turns out, unfortunately, according to Shams, it was an Achilles injury.
Ah,
So that's really unfortunate. I think
yeah.
he does have a 2-year deal, but obviously it still is horrible that it's a lost season
Yeah,
for a guy
man.
who's trying to rehabilitate his value, and I think could have possibly had a solid role for this team just as like a big,
Yeah.
athletic guy off the bench that you can just kind of give some offensive opportunities for. But, again, like it's not going to impact Indiana too much in terms of their overall rotation. I mean, they were already without Isaiah Jackson, so they have multiple centers they can put out there. A few random minutes from Jarius Walker
Mm-hmm.
just kind of
Mm-hmm.
looked out of place,
Mm-hmm.
personally, in my opinion.
Yeah,
But
agreed.
overall, what did you kind of think of, both of these teams in this game?
I mean, from Detroit's perspective, I don't know. And this is where it kind of goes back to what we talked about in the offseason. Like, I
Mhm.
think Cade has a lot to prove.
Yeah.
And it's a long season. It's one game, and a lot of these guys are really, getting their legs back. Like,
Mhm.
some of these guys haven't played for a while, and
Yeah.
and the
Justin
pre
Thompson's still back.
exactly, and the preseason intensity is a different level. That's why we kind of talk about taking preseason with a grain of salt because this is so much more intense.
Mhm.
So from the Detroit perspective, I like some of the things that the additions made. I think the floor spacing was better. They look like I'm not going to say like a good team, but they look like an NBA team now, in terms of
Mhm.
we have pieces, we have structure, but
Yeah.
Cade's our guy and he needs to kind of get the offense going. So I think he can't have slow starts if this team wants to be elite. Like you got to
Right.
be either firing all cylinders, through
Yeah.
all 4 quarters, which is a lot to ask, but granted he's a number 1 pick. So we should be seeing number 1 pick kind of games out of this guy.
Yeah, and that's true.
What's up?
Yeah, and that's true. Like the
Yeah.
team can't really be but so good if Kate Cunningham isn't going to be,
Mhm.
like an elite level player.
Mhm.
And, if he is, right, then obviously the Pacers will be better than a 14-win team.
Yes.
They won't be a playoff team necessarily, but they won't be, that awful.
Yeah.
But, again, they've added some extra pieces to kind of help out because they do have extra shooting. Obviously, the rotation will change probably a little bit when Asor Thompson comes back, whenever he does. Hopefully he can come back sooner rather than later. He
Yeah.
had the blood clot thing,
Yeah.
but just overall, a lot of the pieces just seem very bizarre. But
Mhm.
at the same time, again, that's kind of what we talked about, where they're trying to cater to Cade. So now he has to be able to, kind of take the next step and kind of be able to, lead the team. And it's not that he wasn't doing it before. It's just
Yeah.
like obviously now it's a more serious team. Like you're not
Exactly.
relying on Killian Hayes coming off the bench anymore,
Right.
trying to help you lose games.
Right.
So, now you have a legitimate team, right? Like they still may not be that good, but in theory, they should look, like you said, more like a professional basketball team, which is,
Right.
all you can really ask up for the Pistons. So we'll see. And then, what'd you think of Indiana? Like pretty
Um
much same as usual.
yeah, I mean, kind of goes back to last year. This is another team that pretty much ran it back, and I think the Siakam addition is aging like fine wine so far. Obviously it's been
Hmm.
one game, but continuing from last season where if Halliburton has a stinker game, I think he can really pick up the slack along with the other guys because of the depth, like you talked about. They can go very very deep into their roster, which is awesome, and I think that's the key to success for them because a lot of these guys are really really good. And granted, I really think a lot of these guys, if they were on different teams, they wouldn't be coming off the bench. But yeah,
Right.
prayers for James Wiseman for sure, because that really, really is unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly. Atlanta, Brooklyn, don't have to talk too much about that. More so just kind of, just a couple of young guys on the
Mhm.
roster, right? Obviously, you had for the Atlanta Hawks, right? Jalen Johnson, newly re-signed max man, right? 11 points, 10 rebounds.
Mhm.
Trey Young still doing his thing with 30 and 12. Dyson Daniels starting, right? Looking pretty good for them. as kind of their defensive, two-way guard, even knocked down a couple of threes, which is big for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Risa Share came off the bench, hit his first three, did shoot 2 for 8.
Yeah.
But again, regardless, like, what did you think of, this Hawks group? And also Okongwu at 28 off the bench.
Yeah. I mean, solid opener. I mean, Trae Young kind of picking up where he left off last year, a little bit more inefficient, I would say, but he got to the line, did his thing, and I think you kind of expect that when you're going up against Brooklyn. But I think the kind of like the main story is probably Risa Share, I guess, in terms of like what he looked like. I thought it was solid. I mean, it seems like his role is for sure going to be like a 3-and-D wing, which is something that I feel like they have tried to put around Trae Young in the past, but they've never really hit on it. So hopefully this one hits down the line because, I mean, DeAndre Hunter, I don't think is the answer. Risa Share, I think he has the skills to be the answer, but we need to see that really develop. And I think he can be that guy because I did like some things that he did. But, not a crazy debut by any means. Kind of like your run-of-the-mill rookie debut. Very inefficient, but generated some decent looks with some mistakes.
Yeah, and I don't really want to talk about Brooklyn too much just because there's not really a whole lot interesting there. I mean, they have a couple of young guys like, what is it, Clowney, with Wilson. And then, but outside of that, like, we know this team is going to stink.
Yeah, Cam Thomas with a 30 ball, though. But I think that's kind of guaranteed when he's going to be taking probably 30 shots a night anyway, so why not?
Yeah. Yeah, like him and Dennis Schroeder are going to probably try to compete for who can take the most shots on the team.
For real, though. So. You're not wrong.
Yeah. And then, moving on, right? Orlando smashed Miami. Miami looked okay in the first half, but then in the second half looked really awful. Orlando pretty much just swallowed them up and shut them down. I mean, Jimmy Butler looked atrocious. Both him and Bam were really bad. I mean, they were like probably two of the worst players on the floor. Yeah, they had they were a minus 30. In that
was
game.
bad.
Yeah, the two worst plus minuses on the team. Some of the other Miami guys honestly played fine. Like Jovic was good. Hero was fine. Rozier was fine. Jaquez was fine. But when your two best players play that horrible, I mean, like you'd have to have like some really superstar level performances from other guys, and they didn't really give you that. Like they were fine, but they weren't really good enough. And Orlando just, destroyed them. And then shout out to Orlando with Paolo and Franz. Both shooting 50% on their threes, both looking really good. And again, if Wagner can shoot those threes and get that 3-point shot back, that'll really help. KCP in his debut 0 for 5, but it doesn't matter. Minus plus 24.
Amazing
played really
defense.
Good. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of his role. Gary Harris came in off the bench, did fine. Suggs was in foul trouble, so he only played like 12 minutes. And Anthony Black came in, played pretty good. 10 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists, even knocked down a 3. So, and again, that's something we talked about where, if a guy like Anthony Black can come in and give them some, solid two-way guard play, that could be something that could really help this team. Like they still, at the end of the day, probably need like a ball handling, playmaking guard in the starting 5, like future-wise. But just in terms of like, what we saw from the team, for one game looked pretty good, and then, couldn't really say that too much about Miami though.
Yeah, I mean, from what I saw, the stuff that Paolo is doing is very intriguing because I think it's one of those situations we already talked about it last year. Very underrated player. But if you watch the things that he does, I'm not going to say like he's like the next LeBron, but you can definitely tell that that's kind of the guy that he's emulated his play style around, with the certain aspects like playmaking, getting to the rim, using his body, physical guy. So shout out to him. I think he might be taking another leap and ascending a little bit further alongside his co-star Franz. I think Franz played amazing as well. That they seem to have some great chemistry. Kind of retooling that, and like you said, Franz getting a shot back is pretty cool. Granted it's one game, but defensively this team is like that. I think they're going to be, picking up right where they left off last season, being one of the top defensive teams in the entire league. So if they can continue to do that, wouldn't surprise me if they're a top 5 seed.
Yeah, the key for them is the offensive growth. If that can be there, then that's where they'll be, an elite team. Because we know defensively they're already awesome. It's just can they improve on the offensive end? But yeah, Paolo plus minus of plus 42 in 31 minutes. I mean,
it's crazy.
I mean,
and it's not being talked about though. It's quite annoying.
Yeah, and like you said, every possession, you can see him kind of just bullying guys, running down the floor, getting dunks, hitting shots off the dribble, making
Passing.
plays. Yeah, passing. So I mean, he's a really, like you said, he's a really awesome player, and
Yeah.
it kind of goes to show, like, yeah, the Orlando Magic made the right decision to take him number one because
Yes.
remember before the draft, right? A lot of the talk was about Jabari Smith Jr.
I
one,
I couldn't
and
believe
Holmgren
it.
two, yeah, then Paolo three. And again, like, because to be fair, I didn't see, I saw them in college, and I was like, oh wow, why isn't Paolo the number one pick? Because obviously their team didn't go super far, but he looked so impressive with his size and with his vision and skill set that you just kind of wonder, like, why isn't this guy the number one pick? And then Vegas clearly was like, he's going to be the number one pick.
Yeah.
So
I'll never
he's
forget our
awesome.
conversation about that draft.
Yeah.
Obviously, that was before we were on the podcast, but I was like,
Mhm.
Paolo's going number one. You're like, really? And then like hours later,
Yeah.
all the odds just completely shifted. I don't know. I guess with Jabari Smith, it was more so like you kind of fall in love with what he could be. But I think
Mhm.
Paolo at the time was like, come on, like you can't not take the guy. Like, come on,
He's
bro.
got our potential.
Yeah.
And then, again, Miami. Yeah, I mean, again, like if Jimmy Butler and Bam are going to be that bad, you're just probably not winning. I mean, does that make you concerned about the Heat at all, or is it just chalk it up to like a horrible game and they'll probably be, relatively fine? Because it didn't look that bad initially in the first half, but then it got bad as we got to like the second half, and they just, couldn't get stops, couldn't score, kind of a lot of the same issues. But again, a lot of that was stemming from those two guys just being horrible.
Well, I'm not too concerned about them. I think I'm just going to chalk it up to a bad game between the both
Yeah.
of them. I'm more so concerned about everybody else as
Mhm.
well because the other guys didn't even really play that well either. So, what does that look like?
Yeah, because a
Rozier,
lot of that was when the game was already kinda done, so
right? And it's like Rozier. I don't know how I feel about that one. Tyler Hero, okay, can't defend still. So it's like I haven't really seen a whole lot of improvements thus far. Kel'el Ware didn't
mhm.
really play a lot.
No.
So that's
Thomas
some
Bryant.
yeah, that's somewhat concerning, I guess. Granted he's a rookie, but I think all Heat fans fantasies
Mm,
at this point are Bam at the 4, Ware at the 5, but we
mhm.
didn't really get a whole lot of that. So that's a little
Yeah,
bit disappointing.
yeah, the starting 5 is what it is. That's what
Yep.
I expect. I expected Jovic to get the nod because he was already starting there last year,
Yep.
and, the only other person that you probably could have realistically put there may have been, like, switching Jaquez and Butler, but I don't think they would have done that,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
but, yeah, I'm not really it was horrible, but again, I'm gonna chalk it up to just a horrible game. It was more so just I was kinda surprised at how bad both of them were. Cause like, like with Butler, people talked about his preseason stuff, and he had 3 points and was 1 for 8.
Mhm.
You almost wouldn't even think he was out there, and then Bam, because of the Olympics, you thought that would probably be really good, but, I mean, again, Orlando's no joke defensively, so
Yeah, they don't
that
like
may have
that.
been yeah, so that may have been part of it. Then we're moving on. Milwaukee, Philly. I didn't personally really watch this game because word got out last week, right, that Embiid and Paul George were going to be out for the first week of
Mhm.
the season. So I didn't really have, and also Middleton's going to be out indefinitely. So I didn't really have much of an incentive to watch. I watched a lot of the other games. So,
Mhm.
I know you saw it, so you can probably
Yeah,
talk, more so about what you saw.
sure.
But, I personally didn't have as much incentive just because of the guys that were missing.
Yeah, I mean, we should probably start with Philly because those guys are missing. I know we normally start with the winners, but Tyrese Maxey, this performance, I don't really take a whole lot of things away from because he was the only guy out there, pretty much the only legit offensive option on a
Mhm,
team like this where you're missing your number 2 and number 3 or number 1, excuse me, number 1 and number 3, I guess.
mhm.
And it sucks because he tried his best, but you know, it was not enough. I think some of the additions that they did make kind of made me feel pretty good. Like the
Mhm.
Yabusele player, from France, he had a
Yeah.
solid debut. I thought, Caleb Martin, I thought he looked pretty good. I think there were situations where these guys definitely, played pretty well, but at the same time, you look at the score, it's a pretty bad loss. Granted, they
Mm.
didn't have their players, so that kind of sucks. But from the Bucks' perspective, I think Dame looked, like a vintage Dame performance where, you kind of feel good about, what he was able to do in the pick and roll with Giannis. I thought Giannis looked okay.
Mm.
There were times when I thought he wasn't taking this game seriously, because who really would, considering your
Mm.
opponents out there. But, granted, he did have a good game. But between the two of them in that attack, I think it's going to be looking better than it did last year. I think they've probably gotten more comfortable. That's what it seemed like to me. Not much has changed offensively, but
Mm.
overall, just a really good performance from the Bucks, and they should have won this game. Like you said, when the news came out that obviously Paul George would not be playing and Joel Embiid was not going to be playing as well. So kind of like a must win, and they did that in a very good fashion, dominant fashion, and yeah, I think everybody kind of expected that once we heard the news.
Right, because to be fair, these were some of the games that they would lose last year during the latter part of the season.
Sure.
Because they had a couple of some bad losses toward, like the loss to like Toronto and
Yeah.
the loss I think to the Wizards,
Yeah.
and some others. So good to see them maybe getting back on the right track, but still got a long ways to go. Then after that, Cleveland, Toronto, saw some of it, but didn't see all of it. I saw most of the first half, and obviously I think the main thing with Cleveland is that Evan Mobley looked pretty awesome, right? 25 points, 9 rebounds, 2 steals, 3 blocks, even knocked down a 3. And that's a guy that we talked about that we're very high on. And if he can have, a really elite season where he's kind of pushing all-star level status, right? That's something that could really boost Cleveland's prospects because, obviously Garland wasn't really that great this game, but you didn't really need to have him do as much because you had Mitchell, you had Allen, and you had Mobley, and you even had some guys off the bench like Karis LeVert went 8 for 9 and had 19 points, or even like a Georges Niang, had 11 points. So just in general, right? Like it's pretty much the same team. It's just you change the coach with Kenny Atkinson, so hopefully he can continue to find ways to get these guys to kind of mesh together. But Mobley's really the swing piece, as we talked about. If he can give you this, and I'm not expecting him to give you 25 and 10 a night, but if he can give you somewhere close to 20 and 10, if he can give you, like I said, borderline all-star level production every night on both ends, then that's where Cleveland's ceiling could be raised a little bit. Still probably not quite good enough to be like a championship team, but good enough that I think you feel a lot better about this core group of guys.
Yeah, I think if this team somehow pivots completely and turns into the Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley show, then I think we're in for a surprise. I think they'll be a big riser in terms of the Eastern Conference. Granted, you do have to look at who they played. Toronto, very bad team. But regardless, that's how Evan Mobley should look against teams like this. And hopefully he looks like this against good teams, because if that's the case, then, I think a lot of people will start taking Cleveland more seriously. Because I think the problem was, there's some guys on the team where the levels that they were at last year, you could just tell we're just not ready to contend. Like Garland last year, not ready. Granted, injuries. Evan Mobley definitely not ready. Look better, towards the end, but still. But yeah, overall, I think a very good game from Cleveland. Pretty much a win. Like like a must win. You have to win this game. You can't open the season losing to Toronto.
Yeah, and I don't want to talk about Toronto too much. They're going to be horrible.
Yeah,
I mean, Grady Dick was fine, I guess, but and I know they have some guys out, like Barrett's out, and I know Quickly got hurt.
Sure.
But they suck. They're not good, and I don't know. It's a weird team. It's just kind of bizarre because just like the decisions that they've made, just kind of surprised me. Just in terms of like the guys that they're paying a lot of money to. Scotty Barnes is fine in terms of that money. I mean, he wasn't good tonight, but like. Or not tonight, but that night. But either way, like, just the money they're paying to a lot of these guys is just kind of bizarre, right? Like you got Quickly and Barrett and Pirtle all making like 80, 100 plus $1 million. And then you combine that with the Barnes contract, which again, you have to do anyways. And he's really good. It's just, I don't know. I don't need to spend much time on them. They're not good.
Yeah.
Then moving on, Charlotte, Houston. This was kind of a surprise. In the first half, Houston was kind of just dominating Charlotte and looked really impressive during the early stretch where you saw like Alperen Sengun right? Looking kind of unstoppable. I mean, the only Hornets big was Nick Richards, right? So just, really only one center. And then but either way, he was having his way, against those guys. And then you even had, like Jalen Green and like Alpert and Amon Thompson, come in and play really well.
Mhm.
And then in the second half, it just kind of all fell apart. It was really bad. I mean, Jalen Green had a couple of good possessions to get him back in, but he shot 9 for 23. Although Van Vliet shot 4 for 18, but he did have 6 assists and 2 steals. But kind of a rough loss if you're Houston, because with Charlotte, which is the team we really should have started with, right? LaMelo Ball, 34, 11, and 8, right? Just kind of a reminder of, this guy is really good when he's healthy. Just he hasn't been able to stay healthy. But more importantly, Brandon Miller got hurt in the game and only played 10 minutes. So Trey Mann was out there and looked awesome. 24 points, 6 rebounds, 1 assist, 8 of 16 from the field, 4 of 8 from 3. We talked about it at the time. That was a really good trade for Charlotte because it was just another solid guy to have in your rotation. And then, you know, also another starter, right? Mark Williams, that guy was out anyways. So Charlotte being able to come in and get a win, against the Rockets with multiple starters out, and it kind of just the LaMelo Ball show in the fourth quarter, plus minus 14. That's pretty impressive. I mean, obviously it's one game, and again, also I forgot Josh Green out too, so that's another guy, right? So I mean, you're talking about like basically probably 3 starters because he probably gets the nod to start if he's healthy. So again, like I still don't really expect a ton from Charlotte. It's just annoying because it always feels like they're a team where you don't really want to quit on them because when they're healthy, they kind of remind you that they can be a fun team. It's just like tonight, like in this game, they're still not healthy, and they're even less healthy than they were going into the game. Hopefully, Miller doesn't have to miss time, but just overall, really good performance from LaMelo Ball, and 10 of 10 from the free throw line too. Some of that, I guess, they intentionally fouled, but he was aggressive in getting to the free throw line.
Yeah, I mean, he has superstar potential. We've kind of known this for years now. And he continues to flash it every season. It's just he needs to be healthy to do so. And like you said, real a LaMelo Ball masterclass performance. If I'm going to be real, and look at the talent that he's surrounded with. It's nothing super duper crazy. But when a guy like Trey Mann is given this opportunity, it's awesome because he didn't really get these kind of opportunities in Oklahoma City. Like, yes, he did like play here and there, maybe like 15 minutes a game, but like now, you give him 30 minutes on the floor and look what he can do offensively. So shout out to Charlotte for that. But Houston, I think is probably one of the bigger stories because, considering what happened, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, a little later in the episode. But yeah, not a fan of what's going on with Jalen Green. 5 for 15. I think that's just way too many threes for a guy who can't really shoot threes at a high percentage. So that is kind of concerning where, it is one game, but Houston didn't look amazing to me. Just a weird meltdown.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think some other guys should have gotten some minutes at times where it's like, okay, Jalen Green not hitting, let Cam Whitmore or Reed Shepherd, kind of cook up. Just let more opportunities present themselves. But I understand, you just paid the guy, so you probably don't want to, ruin his confidence.
Yeah, Shepard in his debut in 15 minutes, 4 points, 3 assists, 2 rebounds, a block, -6. So
Yeah.
didn't really do a whole lot out
Yeah.
there. But again, the second half is kind of the part that's rough because that's where like the splits are. Like Amen Thompson was a -19.
Yep.
But in the second half, he probably was like a +19 or something. Or the
Right.
first half, he was probably like a +19.
Right.
It's just in the second half, the switch just completely flipped, and Houston just looked really bad. And they had like a stretch where like, they had a couple of plays where they were playing through where they had a 2-man game with Şengün and Jalen Green where they were doing these dribble handoffs and it
Sure.
looked solid. Then that last possession, right, where like Şengün kind of just goes behind his back and then just kind of loses the ball and it goes out of bounds. Just kind of rough, but that's kind of the issue with Houston where, those guys, they got paid, so shout out to them, but they're still, even though Şengün was awesome for most of the game, that's kind of the part where their ceiling is going to be kind of determined by how good those two guys are. Like if those two guys are all-star plus level players, right, then that's awesome. But, but if they're not, then that's where you don't really know. But either way, like again, it was a bad second half. and it was kind of weird, but hopefully they can kind of figure that out. But this is going to be a problem with Houston where who's the guy that you're going to go to late in the game? Because it seemed like they were starting to play through Jalen Green, and then Şengün, had a bad turnover. But that's just kind of something, growing pain that Houston's going to have to go through. So they have to figure out who their closer is. And, I'm not really sure who it is because in theory, Şengün right now is the better player. But is that the guy that you want to go through late in games? I don't know. So we'll see.
Yeah.
And then after that, we move on through the rest of the league, right? Chicago, New Orleans. That wasn't a game I watched. But I know that Lonzo came back and had his return. Zach LaVine looked pretty good. But I didn't watch too much of this game personally. So, not really a whole lot I can say about it. But either way, like New Orleans got the win. Zion was a scratch because he had an illness. But the big story, really more so, was DeJounte Murray fracturing his hand. So now he's going to be out for an extended period of time. And that's a rough loss because you just picked up the guy in a trade. And now you're without him and also without the guys that you moved in order to get him. So that really hurts. But that means that you're probably just going to have to put the ball in Zion's hands more, right? And, we'll see how that looks with him and Ingram and McCollum. But then also Trey Murphy's out too. So you're already like going into the season basically with two guys that are going to be out for an extended period of time. So you still have Zion and Ingram, thank goodness. But, who knows how long that may even last. But at least they got the win.
Yeah, like I said in the short, some things never change, and that's kind of what is going on with the Pelicans. Injuries already, and unironically, it's not even I mean Zion's an illness, but now you have DeJounte Murray and some other rotational pieces that are hurt, and that I think that's going to be probably the story of the season. I think Brandon Ingram had a good game, but will he get hurt down the line? Who knows? But overall, I mean, you can't be mad at a win, but at what cost when you lose DeJounte Murray, who was your big offseason acquisition.
Yeah, so that's kind of the rough part there. And then with Chicago, not much to say there. I mean, again, good to see Lonzo back. He was solid in his return. LaVine looked awesome, so that's kind of good. But not much else there. I mean, Vucevic was fine. But no other real standout performances.
Yeah.
But again, we don't expect the Bulls to be that great anyways. And Bucelis didn't even really play.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And then moving on, going on through, right? Then you get to Memphis and Utah. This game I did watch. The fourth quarter was hideous because it was all free throws. Initially, it was kind of a back and forth game. Then Memphis pulled away. Then Utah kind of climbed back into the game and then kind of just ended up blowing it. But obviously the thing here was Ja Morant returning to basketball action in the regular season for the first time since last season. And he looked pretty good. He had 20 points, 5 rebounds, 10 assists. So he had a solid, pretty balanced game. You also got some good contributions from a lot of the other role players as well. Like, say, for example, Santi Aldama was actually the leading scorer for the Memphis Grizzlies. He got the starting nod because Jaren Jackson Jr. was out. They won 126-124, by the way. That was a late marking in 3. But either way, then you move on. Desmond Bane at 24-4, 4 of 10 from 3, so solid outing from him. Marcus Smart, 11 points, 5 rebounds, and assists to steal, 1 of 6 from 3, 3 of 11 from the field. But, he was fine. He was guarding Markkanen. Well, that didn't really work out that great, but it's okay. But there were also some guys that kind of came off the bench that were kind of big for Memphis, right? Scottie Pippen Jr., 6 points, 7 assists, 3 steals, and a block. Jalen Wells coming in, right? 2 of 6 from the field, but shot 2 of 5 from 3. Brandon Clark, 2 points, 3 rebounds, had a positive plus-minus, but didn't really do a whole lot. But then Jay Huff, right? That was a guy that we saw in the Summer League, kind of just stepped in. Obviously due to the injury to Jaren Jackson Jr., they put out all their bigs. And he stepped in and he had 13 points, 5 rebounds, 2 blocks, 3 of 5 from 3. He looked pretty good. I mean, it was kind of wild because he looked like in the handful of times I saw him in regular NBA games, he seemed a little bit like his athleticism advantage in the G League didn't really translate as much into the NBA, but he looked solid here, mainly because he was spacing the floor and shooting the 3 pretty well, which we knew he could kind of shoot 3s, but, maybe it was just a hot night. But again, kind of credit to those guys, the bigs for being able to step up with Jaren Jackson Jr. being out. I mean, Santi Aldama giving you 27 points, in 30 minutes. I mean, that's kind of big time production in terms of being able to, and he's not the same at all as Jaren Jackson Jr., but that's huge. That this is kind of the awesome thing about them having drafted so many guys, is that you can kind of slide some of these guys in, and then on any given night, they can just kind of come in and, replace some of the guys. Not saying that you want this every night, but that's kind of the cool part of having so many, so much depth and so much young talent that you can just put out there. So, again, it probably shouldn't have really been that competitive of a game because it's Utah. But to be fair, Utah had some solid performances. Markkanen still awesome, 35-9. Taylor Hendricks at 12-5. Kessler, kind of came back with a vengeance, 16-14 with 5 blocks. Again, Jay Huff was a problem because of the 3-point shooting.
Yeah.
But, the guards is kind of where it fell apart, more so from Keontae George, because Sexton was fine. He had 16-3. And Clarkson off the bench was all right. But George just didn't really have a good game. 12.7 assists, 3 of 18 from the field. Really struggled to finish around the rim, where you could kind of see, like, trying to finish at these awkward angles where it seems like he's not very strong. So he kind of has to try to finish around guys. And he's not like a super athlete, right? He's a good athlete, but not like a crazy athlete guy. So it's kind of tough for him in some of those spots. But either way, like, it's Utah. Like, they're not looking to win like a ton of games anyways. They do have some solid players. Collins came off the bench, and I think part of it is like the lineup just makes more sense, right? Where it's like you don't have Collins and Markkanen and all these random guys and Kessler playing together. It's a much more conventional lineup. So that's where I think it helps a guy like a Kessler. And, that's kind of a guy that you drafted, so you should prioritize him over Collins anyways. But, just overall, Memphis, what did you think of them? And also, even forgot to mention, Zach Edey started 6 point, or excuse me, that's foul. My bad. 5 rebounds, 6 fouls. It was okay, but,
Yeah.
Jay Huff and Aldama were kind of the
Yeah.
stars of the show.
Yeah, nothing really like eye popping, I guess, from kind of like the guys that you expected to go off in this game from Memphis's perspective. Like you said, I mean, Ja Morant, I think he had like one of those silent but deadly games where it's like he was efficient enough to the point where he got them over the hump alongside the leading scorer Santi Aldama, which I think was definitely a surprise. If you would have asked me who the leading scorer of this game was, I probably would have marked down Ja Morant or somebody of that nature. But hey, I mean, a Santi Aldama win is a Santi Aldama win. Desmond Bane, I think he looked pretty good as well. I think overall it is kind of cool to see Memphis have depth, which I think was something that I did not expect them to have, considering what happened last year. But all those guys contributed to a solid win. And then from Utah's perspective, I think this is just going to be growing pains with the young guys, and that's what we kind of talked about. Like, they have the pieces for the future, but in the now, it's probably going to be a rough season or two, if they keep this young core together and stuff like that. But Markkanen kind of proving why he was so sought out after, because he's a legit scorer and he knows what to do when he has the basketball in his hands.
Yeah. Then Golden State smashed Portland 140-104. Not really. I mean, obviously, well, I don't want to say not really much of a surprise, but I mean, it kind of wasn't really much of a surprise because I don't think Portland is very good. I guess it was a little more surprising the margin of victory. But, again, with Golden State, again, some positives. They started the starting 5 that I thought they should probably start, where they actually went with the bigger starting 5. They had, Steph was the smallest guy, which is normally the case anyways. But after that, it was Wiggins and Kuminga, Draymond and Trace Jackson Davis. Kuminga didn't really do much, but everybody else pretty much played well for the most part. Buddy Hield at 22 off the bench. And, for them, that's kind of the cool thing about, I think Steve Kerr said they're going to have a 12-man rotation, which is kind of insane. But, they do have a lot of players who are solid players. It's just, again, it's more so I don't personally think that that the top end talent is enough to be able to contend, but I think they have enough reasonable depth that they should be able to win, a decent amount of regular season games. It's just, is it enough to kind of compare to the other teams where maybe they don't necessarily have like quote unquote 12 players, but they might have 8 players that are a lot better. in totality, but also like against a team like Portland, who's just bad. I mean, this was not the issue for Golden State last year. By and large, they did pretty well, mostly against bad teams. Like the issue for that's part of the reason why they were still able to win 45 games. Their issue was against the good teams. That's where the struggle really came in because they just weren't able to consistently beat good teams, which is kind of interesting because usually you're more concerned if you can't beat bad teams because those are the teams that you should be beating and those are the teams that you have to take advantage of so that way you don't fall too far behind in the standings. But for them, again, a lot of solid performances, and they shut down Portland. It was actually a close game initially in the first half because it was pretty ugly for Golden State early on, but it was just because they were missing shots. And then once they got into it, they were fine. They shot 20 of 48 from three. So I mean, again, solid performance from pretty much everybody. I mean, Steph was 4 for 10, but it didn't matter, right? Because everybody else was able to contribute on the offensive end. And that's kind of what they're looking at, right? Like a strength in numbers thing, just not like 2015, 2016 championship level Warriors. But, it was a good performance against a team that you should be beating.
Yeah, I think this was a statement win. Not necessarily the fact that they won it, but more so in the fashion that they did. 140 to 104 is pretty good, regardless of who you're playing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They could have won this game without Steph, and I think that does speak volumes to, like you said, the amount of depth that they do potentially have. And, if Wiggins can play like around this level against good or, mediocre teams, then I could see the Warriors actually being pretty good this season. As long as we know that Steph is going to, go off and the system's going to be very similar. We just need Wiggins to really be that number 2 option that I think we know that he can be because we saw it in 2022. But regardless, I mean, there's nothing that you can hate from the Warriors' perspective, but from Portland's perspective, I am very concerned about this team. They have a lot of good potential pieces, but the fact that Scoot is coming off the bench
and still isn't really playing good
and still isn't doing anything.
What actually happened?
It was bad. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're not prioritizing his development. Maybe he's false advertising. It's one game, but not a good start for Double O.
No. Yeah. I mean, the meme is coming back to life again, but just I don't know. I just don't really know what to make of it because again, like I didn't expect them to be good anyways, but just kind of like just watching them. And again, like in the first half, it didn't look this bad. But then it just got kind of just bonkers, out of control. And again, like to be fair, some of the players that are getting minutes may also just not really be that good. Like it's possible that Chris Murray may just not be very good. Like we may have just kind of thought he was better than he actually was. But they are missing some guys, right? Like Shaedon Sharpe is out, and that's a good young player. Robert Williams is out as well. We did get some Clingan minutes. Not very many, though. He only played in like 12 minutes. And that's kind of the annoying part of this team is that there are guys on this roster that shouldn't be on this roster. Like Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton should not be on this team. And it's not because they're bad players. They're good players. It's just they don't belong on a team like Portland where they're just taking minutes away from these other guys. Like Donovan Clingan, that was their lottery pick guy. That's a guy that should be playing at least, worst case scenario, 25 minutes a night, but he only got 12. Right, in a game that you lost by 40. So it wasn't like he couldn't play. It wasn't like, we have to win this close competitive game. Like, no, it was just, I don't know. I didn't really like what I saw from a lot of these guys. And again, we talked about it. It's a weird fit of players, and there are guys out. And I know they're going to be bad. It's just, again, this is a team that at the deadline should look very different. If they don't look different, that's a disappointment because, like I said, there's just so many guys on this roster that don't need to be on this team. And again, it's not because they're bad; they just don't fit like the timeline. Like Jeremy Grant should not be on this team. He's already 30, and he should be more. He should be on a team that's a solid team where he's like an additional piece. Now, his contract, obviously, because it's so big, maybe that's a problem, but I don't know. Like again, like I liked the pickups this offseason with Avdia and Clingan, but the pairings, I don't know. And like, I mean, like a lot of people will blame Billups and like, yeah, maybe he's just not that great, but like also it's just not a good combination of players. Like,
agreed.
It would be even worse if those guys were healthy. Because imagine trying to like fit minutes with like having Williams and Ayton and Klingon. Like,
Yeah.
where would the minutes
Shade and
work?
Sharp.
Yeah, Shade and Sharp, the guard minutes and wing minutes would look a lot different, and that's my point. That continues to add to the conversation of what is the point of some of these guys being on this team? That's
Yeah.
the annoying, frustrating part, and I don't know if we're going to get an answer because,
Yeah.
I mean, do you see a team trading for Jeremy Grant? Like, maybe, but like,
Not in this
who?
CBA, unfortunately. Unless
Right, like,
somebody's really, really
really
desperate and they
desperate.
blow
Yeah,
something up, you know?
yeah. Robert Williams, I mean, he can't stay healthy. Like
Yeah.
he would be a nice pickup, I think, for teams, but he's out again,
Yep.
and we don't know when he's going to be back. I mean, they have a timeline, but that doesn't mean that is the timeline.
Exactly.
You know how this works, so
Yep.
and Shane Sharp's hurt too, and that's rough because he's a young guy, so that's another lost stretch of development for him, right?
Yep.
This isn't like a veteran guy where like he'll come back, he'll be fine, and not that any injury is good, but just for a young player, it's really devastating because that's time that you're not able to spend on the court developing and growing because he
Yes.
needs to develop and grow because he can be really good, but there's a lot of stuff that he has to improve. But yeah, this team stinks.
Yeah, they suck.
So, after that, then you had another marquee game that was much better than Philly Milwaukee, and that was Suns Clippers.
Mhm.
Now, this game was kind of funny initially because
Yeah.
it looked like the Suns were going to pull away. They were playing pretty well against the Kawhi-less Clippers. Which we got even more information about him where it sounds like he's going to be out for weeks, which again, no surprise there. That's kind of what we expected. So, yeah, not great, but either way, but then the Clippers fought back. They kind of showed that they still have a lot of solid players and they did make a game of it, went up by double digits. Initially, it looked like same old Suns again, where they just kind of were collapsing in the fourth quarter. But then the Suns were able to come back. They got some stops. You saw some more organized offense from them. And then, Durant hits the game tying shot, right? The fadeaway over the two defenders. And then they go into overtime and they're able to pull it out. Devin Booker fouls out, but you got a really good game from Beal. A solid overtime late fourth quarter from Durant because there were points where it looked kind of rough, but he picked it up. Tyus Jones looked pretty solid in his debut, especially in that fourth quarter. You got a couple of impact guys off the bench. So, what would have initially looked like a really bad loss where it looked completely the same as last year, where you're just like, not that you would completely turn on the team after one game, but just it looked like it was going to be the same old horrible fourth quarter just implosion where you're like, what is going on with this team? Why do they look so stupid in late in games? Ended up being like, a nice, a good win. Again, it's against the Clippers with Harden and a bunch of role players, which is not bad per se, right? Like Harden was solid, but again, there were some cool things to see because, like I said, they take way more threes now, which is what they should be doing.
Yeah.
So that's good. A lot more ball movement, a lot more organization, which is nice. You did see, like in the latter part of the game, they had to go small. Nurkic did come back in overtime because of Zubac, although he fouled out eventually. But you saw them go small, which is kind of what they would do sometimes last year, where they would put Durant at the 5. They had him on Harden. Probably not something I would love to do in the playoffs, like for over the course of a 7-game series. But again, it ended up being a solid win. It just, they got it by the skin of their teeth, but this is probably a game that they would have lost last year. They did have like a couple of games where they kind of lucked up and pulled it off in the fourth quarter, like they had one against the Nuggets, where it was like a crazy Durant game tying shot and they won it in OT. But, again, like, solid performances, but it was odd because, like, initially I was kind of like getting ready to say like same old Suns, but they did close it out in the fourth quarter and they got a win against the team that they needed to beat. And also the first game in the Intuit Dome, and the Clipper fans seemed pretty excited about it because it was a competitive back and forth game in the second half. You got to see the wall. I think it did kind of throw some of the players off on the Suns a little bit. And then they got used to it, and then it was better. So that was a cool experience. But what did you think?
Yeah, that wall should be banned. It's freaking cheating. I'm kidding. It's awesome. But overall, yeah, I think the Suns. This was a very. I think you could walk away with this game with various takeaways where you could look at them and be like, yeah, this seems garbage. But then you could also look at them and be like, it's pretty solid considering the way that they rallied and actually didn't lose this game. It's interesting because I feel like we got Team USA Booker. We didn't get, vintage Suns Booker, like where the numbers, but the cool thing
Yeah.
is I might be on board with this because I think if Booker can be one of those do it all guys, but then
Hmm.
also flip that switch when he needs to
Hmm.
and just, go back to, 30 a night book, okay. Well,
Hmm.
whoa. I think, that kind of changes the landscape of this team because I think it gives Beal and KD opportunities more so than this your turn, my turn kind of thing,
Right.
where okay, Book is fine with being, in the corner and crashing for rebounds or, bringing the ball up and setting these guys up, which I think could take this team to another level offensively, which I
Hmm.
didn't think was possible because I think offensively, they're this trio is top of the line, but
Yeah.
defensively is kind of what still scares me somewhat.
Yeah.
Um,
Harden went off and kind of was bullying the Suns guards.
yeah,
They had to put Kevin Durant on him in order to slow him down.
right, exactly, and that's the thing that's concerning, especially come playoff time, because you're going to be going up against players that are better than Harden, that
Yeah.
have bigger frames than Harden, and are going to be attacking Bradley Beal like we saw last year.
Yeah.
Devin Booker, even. Book is a
Tyus
solid
Jones.
defender, and yeah,
Yeah.
don't even get me started on Tyus Jones. He will probably get bullied off the floor come playoff time, and that's where I guess they're kind of hoping for Grayson Allen to be solid again. Dunn,
Mm.
Royce O'Neal, who knows? But I think defensively they're gonna have trouble against bully guards, like or just guards that know how to use their body.
Mhm.
Luca, Ant. I don't need to go through the litany, but overall, a good performance from the
Yeah.
Phoenix Suns. I think.
They needed to win this game and they got
Yeah.
the win.
Yes.
It wasn't initially pretty, but like you said, there were good things because again, Booker was quiet for most of the game until, you know, before he fouled out, where all of a
Yeah.
sudden then he kind of got some movement shooter opportunities. And like you said, if he can do some of that stuff, that will help. Because there's gonna be games where he'll probably have to be, like regular, Booker. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the nice thing of having three stars is that like, there may be nights where like one of them will kind of need to take a step back and somebody else will need to step up. Like tonight was a night for like Beal and also
For
Durant.
sure. Yeah.
But there may be another night where you might need like Booker or so. And like you said, if you can get a balance offensively for all three, that's where you can get some really good things going. It's just again, you still have to kind of find ways to on the other end of the floor. But there are some defensive lineups that I think they'll be able to go to. Their rookies did play. They didn't play a ton. And again, that's kind of where it's like we know that they're probably not going to have like a huge impact in the postseason, but in the minutes that they're out there, you just kind of hope that things just don't fall apart. So that's all
Yeah.
you can really ask for. So
Yep.
I mean, again,
Solid.
minutes from Ryan Dunn, 1 of 5, and then Iguodaro, 6 rebounds, so that's fine. But obviously, most of the heavy lifting came from the Stars in the fourth quarter because again, there was a stretch where it was starting to look really bad, but
Mm-hmm.
they got it.
Yeah.
So then after that, I mean, you kind of go around the rest of the league, and the next day, obviously, we had 4 games. Don't need to touch too much into Boston and Washington. You can talk about the Washington rookies, and kind of mention them if you want.
I mean, they all look young. That's kind of what I would say. Sar very inefficient, -24 against the Celtics. 1 for 7, 0 for 5 from three. I'm not a fan of him jacking 5 threes, but if that's what they want to turn him into a stretch for or whatever, then that's what they're gonna do. Bub Carrington, solid, good bucket, but or solid first NBA bucket, but overall not a good performance from him. Very inefficient. Also turned the ball over too many times. Granted, it's very hard as a rookie to go up against the Boston Celtics and their defensive guards and Derek White and Drew Holiday, specifically Drew Holiday. You could really see Bub's probably gonna be like one of the bigger projects of the rookies because I think he needs to get used to the physicality of the NBA, and you could definitely see that he was not prepared for that tonight. Keyshawn George, he played okay. I thought he was going to start in the G League, but I'm glad they learned their lesson, and are giving these guys real NBA opportunities. So he
Yeah.
played okay, but I think he could be a solid shooter down the line. But overall, just a really, really messy performance. Initially, they were actually really, really in the game. It was like a 1 point game, obviously led by Jordan Poole, but I think we all know, that what Jordan Poole is at this point. And it's really about the young guys and prioritizing their development, because I think, a lot of people considered the Wizards, winners of this draft. Take that for how you will, but overall, the rookies did not play too good in their debuts.
Yeah. And then moving on, these other games actually haven't really finished, so we can't really talk too much about them, as of right now, right? You got Minnesota and Sacramento kind of in a tight game against each other, right? Sacramento right now is up 50-48, but that could easily change. Oklahoma City is playing against Denver right now. They're up 56-47 with 2.5 minutes to go. In that one, I actually was kind of watching that one a little bit, as we were talking. And for Denver, or from OKC's perspective, obviously Hartenstein isn't available, so that kind of changes some stuff up. And Jalen Williams, the center, is also out as well. So like they don't even really have a real backup center. Like they're putting out like Ousmane Dieng and Aaron Wiggins. AJ Mitchell actually got minutes, which I didn't expect at all. So that was kind of bizarre. But then you look at, but again, they're starters, right? Like Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren, they're the two of their three guys, they're dominating. They're looking pretty good. And then from the Denver perspective, the starting five is fine, but the second unit is still awful, right? As of right now, again, still 1/2 to go, right? But as of right now, like the Denver second unit guys are basically like plus minus 16. Like Peyton Watson is a minus 16, and Russell Westbrook is a minus 16 in 11 minutes. So I mean, and those guys haven't played a ton. So that Strother minus 16 as well. Like their second unit is just getting blitzed out there.
Tough.
And that's kind of what we talked about, where from the Nuggets perspective, and again, don't want to really write off anybody in 1/2. But just in general, that's going to be a major problem for the Nuggets. Is even with Westbrook, you still have questions about what are you going to do with that second unit, right? Just because of the fact that there's still not a lot of guys that you can really trust, even outside of a Westbrook, right? Like I don't know if I can trust Julian Strother. I don't know if I can trust Peyton Watson. I don't know. I mean, maybe I can, but I don't really know if I really can. For what it's worth, Christian Brown is starting and he's playing pretty well. So, it seems, that's pretty solid. But again, the bench for now isn't playing well, but OKC looks solid. And then from the Sacramento Minnesota perspective, that's just a back and forth game. So, again, like like Randall, much better game. 22 in the first half, 8 of 10. These are the type of teams that he should be eating up against because Sacramento doesn't have a lot of defensive toughness in the front court. It's just, again, a team like the Lakers where you got guys like LeBron and AD that are capable of matching the physicality. Yeah. But, the other game that actually did happen that we can discuss is Sacramento-Dallas. So, this one was a couple of new look teams, right? Where you had the Spurs with their, new point guard and Chris Paul, a couple other additions like Stephon Castle. They played the new look Mavs where they added a bunch of guys, including Klay Thompson, as well as Quentin Grimes and Najee Marshall. And, the Mavs won 120 to 109. There was a stretch where the Mavs were up a lot. So the final score was a little bit closer than what it ended up being. The first half was competitive because the Spurs led in the first half.
Yeah.
But the Mavs pulled away in the second half and kind of ran the Spurs off the floor. But, just kind of going through the Mavs, like Klay Thompson was pretty good in his debut.
Yes.
22 points, 3 steals, 7 rebounds, including 3 offensive boards, 6 of 10 from 3. We'll see if this will stick. But this is kind of the stuff we were talking about where you just don't have to ask him in Dallas to do as much as he did for the Warriors. And that's what, in theory, should help him because the Warriors kind of needed him to be more of a second option, especially with Wiggins just not really being all that impactful last year. But he doesn't have to be the number 2 guy on this team. He can be like a third option, a nice safety valve, kind of like a bailout guy because he can still shoot. And when he gets hot, it's a tough combo to stop. And again, Luka and Kyrie weren't even really that great in this game. Like Luka had 28, shot 9 for 25 and 4 of 11 from 3. To be fair to him, this was actually his first game. He didn't play in the preseason at all because he had a calf injury. Kyrie wasn't much better, shot 6 for 17. But that, again, like, to be fair, the Spurs defense was pretty good at different points. And that's kind of more so what they're probably going to be, is a defensive oriented team,
100%.
especially with Wemby. But, for the Mavs, again, kind of a slow start to the first half, but they picked it up. And, again, I like a lot of the additions, on this team. Obviously, Dante Exum is hurt. So, Jaden Hardy's kind of coming in and taking his minutes. He looks solid. He just
Yep.
got an extension. So, what do you think of this Mavs team?
I mean, it was solid. I watched the majority of the game
Mhm.
up until the fourth quarter, really. But, the things that Klay Thompson was doing are game changing for this squad because they didn't have it last year. They got it in spurts from guys, maybe where it wasn't sustainable, like a
Right.
PJ Washington, Derek Jones Jr. But if Klay Thompson can consistently hit corner threes, tough contested threes, shots at the end of the shot clock, when things are breaking down and Luka has to kick it out to somebody and Klay's wide open, that's fine. Like I have no problem with that, and I think that's what his role is on this squad. And
Hmm.
yeah, he delivered handsomely in his debut, and it looked awesome. I'm not too concerned with Luka, like you said. There were times where he did make some amazing plays, but at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I think he's just trying to get a feel for NBA speed once again. And really, he's the guy who creates the tempo for his team. So, it,
Mhm.
you know, we all know what this means. He's gonna heat up eventually, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not worried about it. Same with Kyrie.
Yeah. And then from the Spurs perspective, again, defensively they were pretty good for a good chunk of the game. But the offense is just kind of the problem. They were turning defense into offense, but then eventually the Mavs started heating up, and then the Spurs offense, then it just kind of imploded. I mean, Wemby had 17 and 9 with a block, but shot 5 for 18,
Hmm.
1 of 8 from 3.
Hmm.
Sohan was fine, 18.6 rebounds, 2 assists, did a good job of playing off of guys, right? Not too much ball handling, point guard decision making like last season. Barnes in his debut, 17 points, 4 rebounds, and a steal, 7 of 10 from the field. Julian Champagny, right? That was a summer league favorite of a
Yeah.
lot of people
Yeah.
last year. He's starting in place of Devin Vassell, and he had a really good debut, 18 and 7, 4 of 8 from 3. Chris Paul started, had 8 assists and 7 rebounds, but only had 3 points, 1 of 6 from the field. There were some positives in terms of the playmaking, but he still has to be able to be a threat on offense, like in terms of like got to be able to at least hit your pull up jumpers or your threes, or because I know he can't really get to the rim too much anymore.
Yeah, and you
So,
can't
and that's
defend
part of
either.
why. Right, and that's yeah, exactly. Not really great defensively either. So again, it's what we expected. I don't think either of us expected the Spurs to be. I know we got some comments that they could be in the playoffs. I never really thought that. I
No.
think that they'll be a lot better. Like I think they could get to 30 wins, but I don't really expect them to be like one of the, I don't expect them to be one of the 10 seeds in the West. I expect them to be on the outside looking in. But they don't have to be. They just have to be better. They can't be because last year they were bad, but up until the Wemby stuff during the latter part of the season, they were bad, but not even the good type of bad. They were just bad, where
Yeah.
they weren't really fun to watch. They looked horrible. We talked about it a ton last year, right? Like Sohan at point guard, they were running Wemby at the four, just a lot of dumb stuff that didn't make any real sense. That were stuff that you kind of just assumed they were only doing it because they were trying to lose on purpose. And again, some of it I didn't like because I thought it kind of messed with the development of some of these guys. But this is a more serious team, I think. I just don't. Again, Vassell is probably their second best player. So they kind of need him to come back because I think it makes the roles for some of these other guys a lot easier. Because then like Vassell can kind of handle and play, make and create at times, and then you don't have to ask Chris Paul to do quite as much. Just because at this stage of his career, you probably don't really want him to. I mean, he's played almost 30 minutes, but again, there were some things to like in the first half. Stephon Castle came in at 8 and 5 assists. Again, defense was active. So he was solid. So he seemed good. But what did you think of the Spurs?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is similar and echoes like what I said about Detroit. They look like a solid team in terms of like, actually looking like a real NBA roster. There's a level of seriousness. You bring in the veterans like Harrison Barnes, Chris Paul. I think there's a sense of structure as well, a solid rotation. I think the one thing that's probably going to hurt them is depth. There is not a whole lot of depth on this team. At least, viable options that you can really go to in terms of a rotation. I mean, like Keldon Johnson's okay. Stephon Castle, I was actually fairly impressed with, what he was able to
Yeah.
do defensively. Offensively, a little rough around the edges. And it goes back to that physicality thing that I was talking about. It's not the NCAA. This is real NBA basketball. There were times when he would kind of get walled up and he traveled, turn the ball over, whatever the case may be. But that's going to come with the game and time. But yeah, I do like that pickup for sure. Wemby, I mean, it's tough when you know Dallas kind of has like a
Yeah.
solid center rotation, and they were doing a lot to bother him. Kind of
Right.
switching, doing a lot of stuff that the Spurs probably aren't capable of really handling offensively at this point, just because of the lack of weapons in that upper tier. So solid outing for the Spurs, I think, through a first half, but I think their issue is probably going to be running out of gas because of that depth or lack
Yeah,
thereof.
exactly. Right. Yeah. If they start to if they lose a couple of guys in that rotation, they're gonna have some real issues. So they need all those guys to be healthy. And again, Vassell already being out is not a great start.
Yeah,
So just
because he's
kind
really
of throwing
good.
that out. Yeah. Again, he's their second best player.
Yeah.
So um, yeah, he kind of just makes it easier for a lot of these guys.
Hmm.
So, obviously now, we've gone through pretty much all the games, I mean, again, probably maybe it might be kind of long-winded, but again, there was a lot to talk about during this opening stretch of the NBA. So, again, and just to kind of overall, like I guess, what did you think of, opening week, I guess, opening 3 days, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, the first 3 days have been cool. It's good to get basketball back.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that it came with some pretty historic moments, a lot of statement wins, I think is a good thing for the league as a whole. For the fans as well, like you talked about earlier. Almost an hour ago. With Bronny and LeBron playing, I think that's an awesome historical moment. I'm sure tons of people stayed up to watch that. The
Yeah.
Celtics, showcasing their dominance. We could go on and on, but then some things are kind of ringing true already, in the first game of the season that we kind of hinted at in the offseason. Granted, it's been one game, so, we do have to take some things with a grain of salt, but regardless, I think overall it's been a fun, entertaining week, and, they're continuing to build hype as, we get more matchups.
And just, over the weekend, just kind of going through some of these games, right? You got some cool matchups. Like you're going to have Indiana and New York, a rematch of last year's postseason, albeit the Knicks look very different. Memphis and Houston, two young teams. You got Phoenix and LA, right? Those are always kind of, fun, entertaining games, right? Two,
Mm-hmm.
playoff teams. You got,
Yeah.
well, what used to be a cool matchup, Clippers and Denver. Now,
Uh-huh.
not quite as much. Although, again, the role players with Harden, maybe they might win some, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And then when you look, and then you go around Saturday, you got or excuse me, I think it's Sunday. My bad. No, it's Saturday. Dallas and the Suns, right? That's always a hilarious,
Mm-hmm.
fun, entertaining
Mm-hmm.
matchup. Yeah. So, and then Sunday, of course, you got Philly and Indy, but again, Phil Embiid and Paul George are going to be out.
Yeah.
So, again, you do have some cool matchups, but again, first week of the NBA, it's always just kind of tough because there's a lot you want to say about these teams, and there is a lot to say. It's all being thrown at you in one game, so you
Yeah.
just have to be really careful. I think always you got to give it like 20-ish games to kind of before you kind of
Sure.
ultimately declare what you think about some of these teams. Because
Sure.
usually the good teams, to be fair, you do kind of quickly see, oh yeah, this team is really good, right? Usually it's not like a really slow start and then it gets better. Like, I mean, that does happen, but the really elite teams, those are the ones that right away you can tell are really good. Like
Yeah.
Boston right away was pretty good last year. And I mean, they had already been good in years past anyways, but you know what I mean. But
Mm-hmm.
uh going around in terms of rumors around the NBA, according to Shams, LeBron could play 2 or 3 more seasons. I mean, I think we kind of already knew that, sort of, right? That was kind of hinted at that, maybe two. I guess maybe three isn't really what we heard. I think we more so heard two.
Yeah.
But again, it kind of just depends on as long as he continues to stay healthy and still is really good. He could still play. It's just a matter of again, if you're the Lakers, how do you really work around that in terms of what is your plan and your goal for continuing to do things with this team? Because in theory, if you have LeBron and AD on your roster and they're still really good, you still kind of have to plan with them on the roster, right? Like, when they initially signed LeBron back in 2018, I don't know if they expected LeBron to still be here like 7, 8 years after that, but he still is and he's still pretty good. So I'm curious to see what they do with that. But that's what Shams is saying.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty cool, I guess, in theory. I think that for sure will will change the way that they kind of approach their future for sure. But
Yeah.
getting another 2 or 3 years out of LeBron, you won't find me complaining about it. That's awesome. I'd like to see him play for as long as he possibly can.
Then moving on, we got the Clippers allowing PJ Tucker to seek trade. We kind of talked about that, but I don't think he'll be traded. I think he'll probably be bought out, and then maybe he'll go somewhere else. We don't have to spend a ton of time on that, but
Yeah.
um, Clippers. Ex-Clippers trainer suing team, according to Chris Haynes. The team denies wrongful termination claim after trainer alleged Kawhi faced unsafe and illegal injury treatment.
Hmm.
So that was something that was kind of going on the rounds earlier today. So it's kind of bizarre, but again, we don't really know enough about it to really say a whole lot.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'll see where this goes, but kind of a story that was kind of wild to come out. But again, there's been a lot of bizarre stuff with the Kawhi situation with the Clippers for the last several years, right? In terms of the injuries and him having to miss a ton of time. So we'll see what comes of this. I don't know, but I can't really say too much about it since this, right now this is kind of the early stages of it being reported. And they put some of the documents out and whatnot, but we don't know yet for sure everything that's going to happen.
Yeah, just a wild situation. When will it get good, for Clippers fans?
Yeah.
Because this is ridiculous. Wave after
Yeah.
wave, you get hit with something.
Yeah. But according to Baxter Holmes and Ramona Shelburne of ESPN, basically, like, they hired him to get Kawhi, and then apparently, like, just a lot of stuff kind of, fell apart where they basically were kind of like where they claimed they were gonna have him involved, and then it seemed like they didn't really have him involved, and then Kawhi had all these injuries, so maybe he thinks that them kind of using their trainers was a problem. Again, we'll see, but I don't know, just kind of a wild story, just with the
Yeah.
Clippers, but yeah, they always seem to be kind of a story for
Yeah,
whatever reason.
literally. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Then, according to Shams, NBA likely to investigate Sixers. League expected to look in Joel Embiid's participation. Obviously, with the NBA, they have the new clause where they don't really want guys just kind of sitting out if they're not really hurt, right? But we know that Philly, they want to load manage Embiid for the regular season so they can be healthy for the playoffs, right? Apparently, he's not going to be playing in back to back. So we'll see what goes on with that. Probably fines, if I had to guess. But I'm going to assume Philly might be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, if they could potentially get a championship out of it, I think they'll rack up as many fines and find as many loopholes as they possibly can to get around that. But yeah, I mean, what's new in Philly? We're talking about Joel Embiid's health already in week 1. That's why I was saying some things never change.
Yeah. And then we did get a number of, contracts last week, right? And we talked about that. The Jalen Green one was kind of interesting because I think we had at the time when we had last recorded, the Houston guys hadn't really been signed yet. And we weren't really sure whether or not they were going to get contracts, and they both got them. But the one that was more interesting of a contract was Jalen Green because his was only a 2+1. And according to ESPN, they believe that Houston's new contract is designed to make him easier to trade because it's a 3-year, $106 million deal. But again, most of these guys tend to get 5-year deals, right? But this one's only 3 years, and the third year's a player option. So that may change some things for Houston because again, we know that at a certain point they have a lot of young guys, but they're going to have to kind of start consolidating some of that talent because you're not going to be able to have all of these young guys on the roster 4 or 5 seasons from now. You're going to have to kind of decide which guys you want to keep. So, we'll see what Houston does, but it again, we've talked about it where I'm not sure about Jalen Green, honestly. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's not good, and I know he had a great stretch to end last season, but I don't know what to make of him at times because there are nights where he's awesome and
Mhm.
incredible, and then there's other nights where he's just okay, and then there's other nights where he's just bad. Like,
Yeah.
last season he was bad during the start of the year. And then last night he was, solid in spots, but then there were other spots where, like you said, he wasn't good. So I don't
Yeah.
really know I feel like Shengun, you get a little bit more consistency. And that's why I feel better about his contract. But can he realistically be your best player? You probably need somebody on the perimeter or worst case scenario wing that is able to kind of handle your offense, right? Like say with the Nuggets, you have Murray with Jokic, right? You kind of need that, with Şengün because I don't think he can realistically be like your, only number one real option.
Yeah. He needs a guard for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
Jalen Green could be the answer.
yeah, he
But
could.
this contract it makes me very skeptical about a number of things. I think we've even heard like the contract now makes him tradable, like or like
Yeah,
more easily tradable. So that's intriguing, I guess, from that perspective. But overall, he's so hit or miss that it really doesn't surprise me. But it is kind of weird, considering the situation at hand. But yeah, he needs to be like I think he needs to be their best player if they want to succeed long term with
yeah,
that duo. It can't be Şengün who's better than Jalen Green, I think.
yeah, and I think that's a good point. And with Houston and with a lot of these teams, again, it's not about what they say, it's about what they do. And again, the fact that you had the number 2 pick of the draft not get a 5-year deal, I think that kind of says a lot about where they may be thinking, they're headed in the future. Again, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean he won't be there long term, but there's a non-zero chance that he gets moved for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, opening week around the NBA, still plenty of other things to cover. Just kind of remember we will try to get some live streams in over the course of the regular season. We'll see if we can get like a regular schedule going at some point, and we'll let everybody know with that. And again, shout out to everybody who always leaves comments and who likes and subscribes to or likes our videos and subscribes to our channel and helps the channel grow. Again, we appreciate everybody, especially the people also that show out in the live chats as well, because that
Yeah.
makes those discussions a lot more interesting. And we want to have a lot more, in-depth discussions about the season as a whole, because
Yes.
those are always kind of the most fun things to do
Yes.
on this channel is kind of interact with all the fans and all the subscribers. So we appreciate all that. And, again, if you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning of the video, and we'll see you in the next episode or in the next live stream.